concluded in favor of the 18th Amendment, which was approved by 69% of the voters in the state 75 years ago today. And the reason I did that is because, you know, we talk about the 18th Amendment all the time because it protects the gas tax and the car registrations, as has been mentioned here several times today, and it has the benefit of protecting that money from being raided for other good but non-highway purposes. And it's important for us to understand the centrality of the Good Roads Association in the passage of this amendment. And I think it's also important for us to understand why the amendment passed, in terms of us understanding what is going to be required for the very heavy lift that Vic was talking about, because we need tons of money. With all due respect, and I really do respect Senator Hobbs, asking for another $100 million a year for preservation and maintenance for 10 years means that at the end of that period, we're going to have fallen another $20 billion in the hole. And when you have between county roads, oh, and incidentally, the only part of Vic's math that's wrong is you do not double the $700 million a year that Roger Millar needs. You triple it, because the cities need theirs, and they're larger, they say, than the state is, and the counties need theirs, and they're larger. And so the $700 million is really a deficit of $2.1 billion per year. Now, if Senator Hobbs was able to get another $100 million a year, then that math means that we have fallen $2 billion further behind in building up the deficit of adequate preservation and maintenance, and that will lead us from crumbling to collapse. And so Senator Hobbs has been very forthright that that's as much money as he could possibly hope for from this legislature, given the appetite of current legislators to prioritizing this need. And I think that's a very honest assessment, because as a chair, whether it's the senator now, or Curtis King when he was chair, or Mary Margaret Haugen when she was chairwoman, or Judy Cliburn in the House. I mean, they can only do what they can do. And that's why the senator says you've got to put pressure on us. The 18th Amendment is an example of when citizens get sufficiently ticked off, the pressure they can bring to bear. Because basically, in the 1930s, when we did not have enough money to fund schools, and we did not have enough money to provide social welfare programs during the depth of the Depression, the state legislature simply took gas funds that had been dedicated in the motor vehicle fund to the state highway system, and they transferred $5 million to schools and $5 million to social welfare. And people always thought that that was theft, because the people had supported the taxes for building a road system that they desperately needed, and now all of a sudden the money was being used for something else. And so the Good Roads Association, in conjunction with the state Grange, was pounding on the legislature every year. There are quite a few different versions of the 18th Amendment. Each session would have a different one, and it wouldn't get passed until 1943, when it was passed, and we got the one that we got, that provided for dedicating forever, through a constitutional protection, the registration fees for cars and other vehicles, as well as gas taxes and other fuel taxes, as well as, quote, all other state revenue intended to be used for highway purposes, end quote, which is the third element. And so I got the voters' pamphlet from 1944, and I pulled out the page that supported the 18th Amendment. the starting point for understanding what this motorist taxpayer revolt was all about is understanding that once the legislature was basically compelled by complaining by citizens that they had stolen this money from highway purposes and provided it for schools and provided it for social welfare programs during the Depression when they were obviously needed. People were hungry in our country and we had to educate the children. There was no opposition statement in the voters' pamphlet. The only statement was the statement in favor. And it was there because, just as Tim Eyman has been saying the last few days, that the reason 976 passed is because they don't trust politicians, is our state association wrote the statement and made clear that they didn't trust the politicians. So that sentiment is completely identical then and now. But the thing that's, to me, really interesting about this, and I want to just take a couple minutes and then we'll get back to the substance of the program, is that our association wrote this statement. It was signed by the State Good Roads Association, and it was to create a constitutional amendment to limit definitively the use of gas taxes and automobile registration fees to street and highway construction, maintenance, and safety. And so it was from the beginning intended that these monies were to be used for three purposes: construction, maintenance, and safety. And it continues that the state, because we didn't have rail to every city, and we have even less rail now than we did then, the cities are completely dependent upon highway transportation for their existence. And that was a reality 75 years ago today, and it's a reality now. And that the ability for new industries to develop and to expand is dependent upon good roads, upon the ability of trucks, buses, passenger automobiles to transport people and products to and from these communities. And we are urged on the voters, and the voters accepted 79% of them, that by ensuring good roads, the amendment will assure the continued existence and prosperity of our communities. And our association was very clear to the taxpayers when, the citizens as taxpayers when this was adopted, that money had been diverted away from street and highway improvement and maintenance for other uses. That's what we told the voters. And this is, to me, the key line of the amendment. Several hundred miles of good paved, safe highway would have been built to save money in motor vehicle operations had motor tax money been used as it was intended. These were highways and streets we paid for but didn't get. And so the vehicle that was used in order to ensure that we would have this asset that's essential for moving people and product, as we had said, was the limitation of the use of the funds. But the purpose it was to obtain this highways and streets that we had paid for and didn't get. And we also asserted that by conserving highway funds, other taxes would not be necessary. And so the people of this state, acting through the state range and through our organization, put pressure on the legislature, just as Senator Hobbs has invited us to do, because without pressure, we are not going to get funding at anything like the level that Vic has identified. And our association really owes a debt of gratitude for Vic for having very consistently pursued the dimensions of the problem. He's not focused exclusively on preservation and maintenance, and he doesn't have enough in his plan for preservation and maintenance, but he has really attempted to capture the dimensions of this problem, and I'm extremely grateful for that. So I hope that a few of us will still be around in 25 years, but I'm not sure that I will be here for the centennial. I know that Misha will, she's young enough, and Noel. I'm not so sure about Bruce and Vic and me, but...
I'll be here.
Okay. Well, the point is that you would only be 103, so I guess, so...
110 yet, I'll be here.
Okay. So what I'd like to do is to get, well, first of all, I need to say, if you have not signed in, please sign in for Noel, so we have a record of who participated with us here today. The second thing is, we've got more sandwiches, so we're not going to have further breaks, but if you want another sandwich, just go get it as our presenters are going forward. And we're gonna start with the biggest topic we've ever assigned to anybody, with Ken Nelson, and he's going to start by talking about something different.
All right. Well, first of all, you got to realize I've been retired the last 3 years, so it's going to be really different. I'm going to go through these slides pretty quick. So just to start out, Will told me that I could deviate from the program a little bit. So some of the history of our organization. The very first meeting I went to, I think I was sitting next to Mr. Schuster. Somebody said something, and I said, well, who in the Sandhill cares about that? And he leans over to me and nudges me in the rib, and he says, you know, that's our founder. And I went, no, I didn't know that. Anyway, the Good Roads Association, and I wish Jay Spadey was here, was the whole thing nationwide was basically bicyclists that wanted better roads to ride their bicycles. Little known fact. Next slide. So there used to be a newsletter that had a circulation of more than 1 million. Good Roads newsletter was kind of all around the country. Next. So we started in 1899 in Spokane. A group of folks got together and set up the association. That's Sandhill. Next to the globe there. Next slide. In 1907, we convinced the University of Washington to start up a school of engineering. And as part of I think it was kind of like a World's Fair, but it was like a Northwest Exposition thing. There were some buildings. Next slide. And this is actually the Good Roads building, the Alaskan Yukon Pacific Exposition. We had a building. It was kind of a false front, I guess, but it looks pretty cool. And our group in front. I think is that you?
Is that more home?
Yeah, it's the Good Roads building. Next slide. Another picture of that building. We had to sell it to pay for our administrator. And then as I was driving up here, and I noticed, okay, I'm pulling in on what is now Highway 99, and I'm going, oh, look at this. You know, Sam Hill was trying to build Highway 99 from Washington down to California many years ago. He also was involved in the highway along the gorge from Portland east. Next slide. So we've had a long history. This is the program from one of the 27th annual convention that was held in Yakima back in the day. Next slide. And our archives are held at Western Washington University. This is just kind of some of what we do, and I'm not going to read it. Next. And this is kind of some of who we are. Some of these people are still here. Next slide. Okay, the city story. So cities accommodate about 26% of statewide travel. And a lot of this information is from the AWC website and their sort of legislative positions. We do 35,000 lane miles, 740 bridges. About 80% of the funds for local transportation needs come from local sources. And 86% of those funds are unrestricted, meaning things like property tax, sales tax, things like that. And we get, cities get approximately 10% of their funding from statewide sources, a little bit of gas tax, and then they get a little bit of federal money through local programs. There's about $1 billion per year gap in maintenance and preservation funds for cities. And there's about $900 million in capacity needs, deferred maintenance and preservation, ADA improvements, environmental mitigation. When Rick Dorr showed the slide with all the wheelchair, the pedestrian ramps that are going in as a part of a resurfacing project, it used to be that you didn't have to do that. And we had, at the city I used to work for, we had a program where we would, rate all the intersections, and if they didn't have ramps and they had, people that would use them, we'd go around and we'd put ramps in. So then we come back to overlay the road. Now the ramps don't meet the new standards. I mean, the standards change every few years, it seems like. They added the truncated domes, which I think the blind people liked, but the wheelchair people didn't like, and so there was a battle over that. And then, they're really nailing down the slope. It's got to be 12 to 1, and not just front to back, it's got to be 12 to 1, side to side. So they're getting very specific. And they got to the point, I think they even do that now on a chip seal, where if you don't have ramps that meet the current standards, you have to replace it. And what that means is, we did a couple mile stretch of Clearwater, and a third of the cost was replacing ramps. We already had ramps, but they didn't quite meet the new standard, so we had to replace all the ramps. So that's one of the frustrations. Next slide. So one of the effects of Wyman's initiative, the past, is the impact on local options. So we have a lot of cities that use the local option tax to Prosser, for example, I implemented a $20 tax, and they use that to fund their resurfacing program, their BSC program for the whole city. City of Richland's got a mega project for them, the Dupertail Bridge, that part of their financing for their portion of the project to build this bridge was implementing this $20 tap fee. So that's going away. The regulatory costs, that's kind of what I was talking about with the change in the standards on wheelchair and pedestrian ramps. And so when a city, when 86% of their revenue is coming from unrestricted funds, that means police, fire, parks, everybody is going after those unrestricted funds. And so there's competition for a limited pot of money. And because it's not restricted like the 18th Amendment gas tax, everybody has a shot at it. Years and years ago, right, 25 years ago, in Kennewick, they did a similar thing where the community got together, a project list was made up, and the community passed an optional sales tax. And they committed to use that on those 20 projects. And we eventually, built them all. I mean, we got grants and other things to help. But we got them all built, and it continued to build and fund the capital improvement program for streets for years and years. And it was really only about 3 years ago that people sort of forgot what the intended purpose of that half-cent optional sales tax was, and it started to be freed up for, police stations and parks and other things. But I mean, at some point, they were going to figure that out, I guess. Next slide.
Is that the importance of the 18th?
Yeah. A lot of states spend quite a bit of general fund money for transportation, and in my view, that we should. Milk trucks use the road. People that don't drive need roads, just to get the goods to their house, get the mail to their house. School buses. You think about all the uses of, for economic development, for retail, for every purpose you could think of. There's a lot involved in it. So there's been in our community, the slide that Rick was showing of the Benton Franklin Walla Good Roads and their project list. Currently, the local RTPO MPO group is doing their priority listing. And one of it's still draft form, but one of the things that I noted on the current one that they're putting in, the number one project, is maintenance and preservation. One of the complaints we used to get when we'd be out resurfacing a road, the general public would drive by and they'd go, "Why are you resurfacing this road? It's in great shape." And it's like, because we want to keep it in great shape. If you let it go beyond a certain point, you're going to spend many more times money rebuilding the road than you would resurfacing it. Although, as Mr. Flint said, if you build a good base in the first place, a resurfacing will get you a lot farther than if you don't have a good base. So the American Society of Civil Engineers locally has graded our infrastructure as a C grade, our wastewater at a C minus, our stormwater at a D plus, and obviously all of that has an impact on growth and development. I used to have a public works director that used to say, well, the most important thing is water. And of course, the road guys would say, no, it's not. And you go, hey, without water, you don't have a fire department. You don't have houses, you don't have industry, you don't need roads. So, next slide.
Can you stand closer to the microphone?
Sure, next slide. And you've heard me talk about this before. One of the great sources of funding for localities used to be the Public Works Trust Fund. It's still in existence, Public Works Assistance Account, I think it's called. But over the last 3 biennia, they've basically diverted about $2 billion from the account. They've started it up in a small way, again, funded about $95 million in the 1921 budget. But things like there was $160 million transferred to the Education Legacy account, 21.5 converted to the statewide broadband. Historically, for every dollar the Public Works Trust Fund funded, there was about $5.50 in addition that came to the project. And I always thought that this would be a model for a national infrastructure financing program. It's loans for one thing, and one of the things that they do, there was a comment earlier about if people are just going to waste the money. One of the things that the Public Works program did is they rated your management, your fiscal capacity, how you manage your funds. You didn't, if you were letting roads go to heck to try to get them funded, that didn't work for you in that program. So they were able to focus their efforts on targeted improvements that the state or locals wanted. Next.
And that's $2 billion per biennium redirection.
Not sure about that. I think that was $2 billion over the last 3 bienniums.
Which is still $700 million per biennium. $350 million
I
a
mean,
year.
This program started out kind of small and it kept growing. So it was funded by, there was a tax on solid waste, there was a tax on real estate transfers, I think like a real estate excise tax kind of thing. And there was a tax on utility tax. So they had 3 funding sources plus the paybacks of the loans. So the program kept building. And they were low interest loans, but the program kept building in size until eventually they had so much money in there, the legislature saw this giant pot of money that, was essentially unrestricted, and they went and grabbed it.
So another way to look at this is to say that $350 million a year has been taken away from local agencies that needed that money. And now, some of those local agencies have lost their card tab fee that they were able to dispose through a vote of the people or a vote of the city councils, for example. But this $350 million is a lot more than lost card tabs will ever be. It is a huge chunk of local agency budgeting planning power. I mean, they can't.
And I think in the history of the program, there was, and this was a few years back when I was really into it, but they had loaned out billions of dollars and never had a loan default. And that's the other thing. It's a loan program. It all gets paid back. It's a low interest loan program, but it's a loan program that had certain dedicated funding sources going in addition to the loan repayments. So it just kept building. It was a good program.
Just for perspective, on 976, Seattle Times chart, it said that 60 cities around the state that lost their card tabs, accumulatively, were receiving $58 million a year.
Yeah, it's
$58 million a year, the 60 cities, that's $1 million per city per year. And they saw that as a significant piece of their budget. In some small cities, it's a third of their road department budget that they're going to lose. And here we're talking about a $350 million a year program that the legislature decided to blow
I mean, they're
off.
still using the money,
For other
they're just
purposes.
using it for other purposes, and
Right.
not that those aren't good purposes.
It's hard to keep it in perspective.
And then I grabbed this, most of this information was from AWC, but I grabbed this slide, just their overall look at what the deficit is in various areas of infrastructure. And I don't know if this is annual or all-time. 2019 estimated infrastructure needs by sector. And I think that was the last slide. Thank you.